Teach a man how to squabble. Whatever happened to Am I my brother's keeper, huh?
They say fiction inspires real life, but sometimes it's the other way around. Some of the most loved, iconic hood and street characters in film were actually based on real people. Take Wesley Snipes' Nino Brown in New Jack City.
Sit your $5 ass down before I make change.
Which was based on one of Detroit's most infamous criminals, the Chambers Brothers.
A lot of people reference me as the guy that inspired the movie New Jack City. And you know, a lot of people's jokingly call me Nino Brown.
Or Denzel Washington's Alonzo Harris in Training Day.
Police! I run here! You just live here!
A character inspired by a corrupt LAPD cop.
Rafael Perez, charged with stealing and selling 8 pounds of cocaine in 1998, Perez has implicated himself and other officers in order to reduce a possible 14-year sentence.
Then there's the fan favorite Uncle Jerome in Snowfall.
Teach a man how to squabble.
Which was inspired by O.G. Puddin, the founder of the Piru Boys.
Puddin made Piru what it is today. Puddin and Tam, they was, I'll be honest, they was psychopaths. All the Crip gangs in Compton knew Puddin because he put in working against all of us.
These legendary movies give us a raw glimpse into a world that most people only hear about on the news. But here's the thing, as wild as these movies were, they don't even come close to the real stories behind them. Hollywood left out some of the craziest details, and trust, the real-life versions are sometimes way more intense than anything put on screen. Let's get into it. Let's start with a fan favorite, one that some people argue is Denzel Washington's best work ever, Training Day.
My hot nigga. Go ahead, cowboy, you got mad squabbles.
Released on October 5th, 2001 by Warner Bros. Pictures, the film was a massive hit, earning rave reviews from critics, especially for the powerhouse performances by Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke. The movie picked up a ton of award nominations, with Denzel winning the Oscar for Best Actor, while Hawke was nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the 74th Academy Awards. But here's something a lot of people don't know. Alonzo Harris, Denzel's ruthless crooked cop character, was actually inspired by a real-life figure, and not just any figure, but one of the most corrupt cops in history, Rafael Perez. The stuff Alonzo Harris did in Training Day, that was nothing compared to what Rafael Perez was involved in. Back in 1999, the LAPD was rocked by the infamous Rampart scandal, where around 70 police officers were accused of serious misconduct. And guess who was right in the middle of it all? Rafael Perez.
Rafael Perez, charged with stealing and selling 8 pounds of cocaine in 1998, Perez has implicated himself and other officers in order to reduce a possible 14-year sentence.
Perez's story is straight out of a crime thriller. He started off as a dedicated cop, sworn to take down criminals and gangsters. But somewhere along the way, he switched sides and became a criminal himself. And when the feds finally brought him down, he spilled the beans, exposing one of the biggest police corruption scandals in California's history. For the first few years, Ray was good at his job. Really good. His commanding officers praised him for being an honest cop who made clean arrests. He took hundreds of real criminals off the streets, earning a reputation for his effectiveness and dedication. During this time, there were no reports of any police misconduct involving Ray. It seemed like he was on the right path, making a positive impact. Then came 1993, 4 years after Ray had joined the force. An incident occurred that would change everything. It involved a drug dealer who was shot and offed by Ray's partner, David Mack. According to both Ray and David, the situation was one of life or death. They claimed that the dealer had pulled a gun on Ray, threatening to shoot him. In response, David acted swiftly, shooting the dealer first and saving Ray's life. But witnesses had a different version of events. They said the dealer was unarmed. According to their accounts, the dealer was shot once when he approached the police car. After being shot, he tried to run and was then shot again in the back, which ultimately offed him. Despite the conflicting testimonies, both Ray and David stuck to their story. They denied any wrongdoing, and an internal investigation concluded that their actions were justified. The department cleared them of any misconduct. In fact, David Mack was even awarded an LAPD medal for heroism, credited with saving Ray's life during the incident. In 1995, after several years of stellar police work cleaning up the streets, Rafael Perez received a prestigious assignment. He was selected for the Rampart Anti-Gang Crash Unit, an elite undercover narcotics division with the acronym CRASH, standing for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. This special unit had a very clear mission: track and monitor gang activities and membership. The officers in this unit patrolled Rampart, an area just west of downtown Los Angeles, known for its dense population and home to at least 30 different gangs. Because of the covert nature of their work, officers in the Rampart crash unit didn't wear standard police uniforms. Instead, they were allowed to dress in plain clothes, blending in with the community they were policing. By this time, Perez was no longer working with David Mack. He was assigned a new partner, and together they hit the streets with the goal of confronting and attempting to control LA's rampant gang problem. Perez, however, took his undercover persona to the next level. He began dressing more like a gangster than a cop, and started behaving in a way that was disturbingly similar to the criminals he was supposed to be apprehending. He demanded respect from everyone he encountered and wasn't afraid to make people pay the price if they didn't comply. His Puerto Rican heritage gave him a unique edge. Most people assumed he was black, not realizing he spoke fluent Spanish. This allowed him to gather valuable intelligence from the Spanish-speaking community he patrolled. Gang members and drug dealers, not knowing his true background, would often spill secrets and provide Perez with insider information about their neighborhoods. Within months of joining the crash unit, Perez began his descent into corruption. His first admitted offense occurred during his first major drug bust. Perez and his partners seized money from a drug dealer, and rather than logging all of it as evidence, they decided to keep some for themselves.
Gang unit known as Crash, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, had a reputation as hard-charging and aggressive. But to civil rights lawyers, Crash officers acted like another gang.
They were conducting themselves in a way that they were very much like a vigilante group, very much like the group of people, young people that they were after.
This was the beginning of a rapid downward spiral. Perez started stealing drugs and money from other dealers through illegal searches and seizures, using brute force against anyone who tried to stop him. He became adept at setting up gang members for crimes they didn't commit, planting fake evidence to secure arrests. With the money he raked in from his illegal activities, Rafael Perez was able to live quite the lavish lifestyle. He remarried and settled into a beautiful home in Los Angeles with his wife and daughter. His neighbors couldn't help but notice his frequent purchases of new cars and fancy home furnishings. Perez's ill-gotten gains funded his high-end living, which included dealing stolen narcotics. He had a whole operation going. He'd steal drugs from dealers, then pass them off to his girlfriends to sell on the streets. But after years of swiping from street dealers, Perez wanted a bigger slice of the pie. He began stealing drug evidence right from the police lockers. At first, he took small amounts of coke, but soon he was snatching up pounds of the stuff and replacing it with flour or Bisquick mix to cover his tracks. While he was building his criminal empire, Perez stayed in touch with his old partner, David Mack. The two remained close, and it was Mack who introduced Perez to Suge Knight, the CEO of Death Row Records. Suge was looking for off-duty police officers to beef up his security team, and Perez fit the bill perfectly. Perez snagged the job, and on his days off from the LAPD, he worked as a private security guard for Suge Knight and Death Row Records. By early 1998, Perez had completely crossed over to the dark side. He would drink and throw wild parties with exotic dancers in hotel rooms while he was supposed to be on duty. He even shot suspects without cause and neglected to call for medical help after seriously wounding them. One man he shot was paralyzed and later sent to jail for 23 years. Perez had grown so comfortable with breaking the law that he became careless, and it was this carelessness that eventually led to his downfall. On August 25, 1998, the hammer finally came down on Perez. SWAT teams stormed his quiet suburban neighborhood, arresting him for stealing nearly $1 million worth of coke from an LAPD evidence locker. The investigation revealed that Perez had checked out the drug evidence using a false name, raising red flags among his colleagues. Facing a potential 12-year prison sentence for his crimes, Perez made a deal with prosecutors, agreeing to expose widespread corruption within the LAPD's Rampart division in exchange for immunity. Over the course of 35 grueling interviews, Perez spilled the beans on an array of shocking misconduct. He detailed how officers planted evidence to secure convictions, used excessive force during arrests, fabricated alibis for each other, and intimidated witnesses who dared to speak out against their actions. He even recounted instances where police officers plotted to end their suspects. Perez's confessions were so extensive that they filled a staggering 4,500 pages of testimony transcripts. However, the most jaw-dropping revelation centered on Javier Ovando, a gang member who had been shot 3 times and paralyzed by Perez and his partner during a stakeout. Perez admitted to planting a weapon on Ovando after the shooting and lying in court, claiming that Ovando had attacked them.
The dramatic case to come to light is that of Javier Francisco Ovando. He spent nearly 3 years in prison before prosecutors discovered he'd been framed. Perez has since admitted Ovando was unarmed and that he and his partner, Nino Durden, planted a gun on Ovando after they shot him.
By the time Rafael Perez had finished blowing the lid off LAPD's dirty laundry, a staggering 70 officers from the Rampart Division found themselves under investigation. The fallout was massive. Across California, doors opened to release wrongly imprisoned victims, leading to the overturning of over 100 cases. After Perez's bombshell revelations, the entire CRASH, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums task force, was disbanded. From then on, all gang officers were required to wear standard police uniforms. The U.S. government also stepped in, with the Department of Justice overseeing and monitoring LAPD activities for 5 years. During his trial, prosecutors painted Perez as a rogue cop with ties to an LA blood gang, a man who took the law into his own hands. Perez owned up to being a bad cop, though he claimed he never realized the extent of the harm he was causing. He believed that taking gang members and drug dealers off the streets justified his actions. In court, he apologized for his deeds.
No justification for my misdeeds, either on or off duty. And I'll tell you with every inch of my heart and soul that I am truly, truly sorry.
In 2001, at just 33 years old, Perez was released from prison after serving 3 years of a 5-year sentence for stealing from a police evidence locker. Later that same year, he pleaded guilty to the shooting of Javier Ovando and was handed a 5-year federal prison sentence. After serving 2 years, he was released and placed on parole. Thanks to his role in exposing the Rampart Division's corruption, Perez received full immunity for all other crimes he had committed as a police officer. Next up is Snowfall. If you've watched the show, there's a good chance Uncle Jerome was one of your favorite characters. With his gritty demeanor, raw street vibe, and unforgettable one-liners, he easily became one of the most loved and respected characters in the series.
Teach your man how to squabble.
But here's something that might just blow your mind. Uncle Jerome wasn't just some randomly written character. He was actually inspired by a real-life figure, someone so feared, so ruthless, that he's considered one of the most dangerous men in history. Meet OG Puddin. Now, Puddin wasn't just another street dude, he was the man, the founder of the Piru Boys, the group that later became the foundation of the Bloods Alliance. OG Puddin wasn't just another street figure, he was the founder of the Piru Boys, the group that later became the foundation of the Blood Alliance. If you think Uncle Jerome was tough, Puddin was on a whole different level. His reputation wasn't just based on hearsay, he earned it through actions that some would describe as downright psychopathic and decaying machine.
What it is today. Puddin and Tam, they was, I'll be honest, they was psychopaths. And I used to see them, I said, man, there'd be some good Crips, because these some straight killers.
His story goes way back to the early days of Compton's gang wars, a time when the Crips were running the streets, growing in numbers, power, and boldness. Leaders like Raymond Washington, Tookie Williams, and Michael Conception turned their focus to Centennial High School, targeting students and recruiting followers by force. Within a short time, the Crips gained a large following, but not everyone was willing to bow down to their intimidation tactics. One day, things took a serious turn when Raymond Washington and a group of his followers decided to test their power by attacking Puddin and his close friend Vincent Owens. Both young men were living on Piru Street at the time and were well respected in the neighborhood. Raymond probably thought they'd fold under pressure like others had, but that wasn't the case. Instead of backing down, Puddin and Vincent fought back with everything they had, refusing to let the Crips victimize them. That moment was a game changer. It wasn't just a simple street fight. It set off a chain of events that would forever change the gang landscape in Compton and beyond. At the end of the heated confrontation between Sylvester Scott, aka OG Puddin, Vincent Owens, and Raymond Washington's crew, someone could be heard shouting, "Don't mess with nobody from Piru Street and take that Crip dude with you." That line set the stage for something much bigger. Fueled by their refusal to be bullied and a growing need to protect their turf, Puddin made a bold move. He officially created the Piru Street Boys, claiming the area around Compton's West Piru Street, which intersected Central Avenue, just north of 136th Street, as their turf. The Piru Boys started small, and in the beginning, they were loosely associated with the Crips. But as time went on, tension started bubbling under the surface. Internal conflicts arose, and Puddin realized that aligning with the Crips wasn't in their best interest. They split off and decided to carve their own path. The problem was, the Crips heavily outnumbered the Piru Boys, and going against such a large established gang wasn't going to be easy. Puddin had to think bigger. He began uniting smaller black sets from areas surrounding Compton, places like Looters Park and Westside neighborhoods. These smaller groups shared the Piru Boys' disdain for Crip dominance, and under Puddin's leadership, they came together. This coalition would eventually evolve into the Bloods, a powerful alliance that changed the game in LA forever. To distinguish themselves from the Crips, the Bloods adopted the color red as their identifying mark, a move that's still iconic today. But standing out came at a cost. Being outnumbered meant that the Piru Boys and their allies had to level up fast, especially when it came to firepower. Violence was inevitable, and Puddin knew they couldn't rely on fists and knives forever. To afford the heavy artillery they needed, the Piru Boys had to step into the same game that the Crips had mastered, the drug trade. Puddin, though still a teenager, had already earned a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. He quickly became a key player in the drug scene, not just surviving but thriving. He was more than just a hustler. He was strategic, ruthless, and determined to hold his ground. By the time he was fully established, Puddin wasn't just one of the biggest drug traffickers in Compton. He was the undisputed leader of one of the city's most violent and feared gangs.
Yeah, Puddin was nothing nice.
Puddin wasn't the type to stand out as a fighter. His reputation didn't come from throwing hands.
The fast draw with the gun. And because he's not here with us, I might say some things like, he was successful in putting some holes.
He took out 5 bullets and put 1 bullet in and spin the drill, walked up to my head, right? And pulled the trigger, right? You know, and told me, you can go. He did me and my holder in it and pulled the trigger. Because he talking about he was in a good mood that day. But he was a psycho.
It came from what he did with a gun in his hands. In 1972, the real war in Compton began. Puddin decided he wasn't going to wait around for the Crips to make a move. He brought the fight to them. He and a small crew of Pyrus opened fire on a group of Crips, marking the start of what would become an all-out battle for control of Compton. That initial attack ended in a quadruple shooting, leaving 1 person dead and several others injured. It was a bold and bloody message that Puddin wasn't playing games, and from that moment on, he became Compton's most wanted.
And a leader of a gang that opposed the Crips. It was like a trophy. He'll put AC Papa Lewis on the back. And the cool part about having a target on your back, youngsters, you don't even know.
Every Crip in the area wanted Puddin dead, but catching him was easier said than done. Puddin was strategic. He never stayed in one spot too long, and he constantly switched vehicles after pulling off hits. This made him incredibly hard to track, and his elusiveness only added to his mystique. Over time, Puddin's name started carrying a kind of mythical weight. People whispered stories about him, claiming he was untouchable, but Puddin wasn't just hiding out. He was on the offensive. He would venture into enemy territory, including the east side of Compton, just to prove a point. One of his most notorious targets was the infamous Red House on Pine Street. The Red House was a known Crip hangout where Tookie Williams and other big names often gathered. Puddin made it a personal mission to shoot up the Red House on multiple occasions, sending a clear message to the Crips that nowhere was safe. Puddin wasn't just gunning for anyone, though. He had a hit list. His targets were the top Crip leaders, the ones who had the most influence and power. And at the top of that list was Tookie Williams himself. Tookie wasn't just another Crip. He was a legend in his own right, known for his size, strength, and leadership. Most people wouldn't dare cross him, but Puddin wasn't most people. One day, Puddin finally got his chance. He ambushed Tookie on Almond Street, catching him off guard. Armed with a .45, Puddin opened fire. Tookie scrambled for cover, ducking behind a house to avoid the shots, but he wasn't quick enough. One of the bullets hit him in the leg, leaving him seriously injured. The hit was a shock to everyone.
Surprise Tookie. Surprised the heck out of Tookie. Over there on Almond Street. Shot him. Tookie didn't expect that.
Tookie was seen as untouchable, a giant in the Crip world. For someone to not only go after him but actually injure him was unheard of. But even someone like Puddin couldn't keep up that kind of lifestyle without consequences. Eventually, his reign of terror came to a pause when he got arrested for a R charge. Puddin was sent to prison, and for a while, the streets of Compton got a chance to breathe. But while he was locked up, Puddin didn't just sit around. Prison became his training ground. That scrawny kid who once loved to toss around a football was gone. By the time Puddin was released, he bulked up, becoming a muscular and even more intimidating figure. When Puddin got out of prison, he jumped back into life, and part of that included starting a relationship with Jewel, famously known as the First Lady of Death Row. At first, things between them were intense, full of passion and fire. Jewel was a rising star in the music world, known for her connection to Death Row Records, and Puddin was still one of the most feared and respected figures to come out of Compton. Together, they seemed like a power couple from two different worlds. But as fiery as their romance was in the beginning, it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. Their relationship started hitting rough patches, and what was once hot and heavy turned into arguments and drama. Things reached a breaking point when, in a shocking turn of events, Jewel shot Puddin in the chest.
I had went to jail for shooting this named Puddin, who started the Blood Gang.
Jewel later claimed that it was self-defense, saying Puddin had been physically abusive and that he was jealous of her success with Death Row.
I had a lot of wanted to kill me after I shot dude, but they don't know it was self-defense because he was beating me up and he was very violent and jealous.
The gunshot wound he suffered during his altercation with Jewel would change the course of his life. While he survived the incident, it left lasting damage that would eventually catch up with him years later. By 2006, Puddin's health began to decline, and complications from that old wound finally took their toll. He passed away at the age of 51. Next, let's talk about New Jack City, a classic that dives into the rise and fall of a ruthless Harlem drug lord, Nino Brown, played by Wesley Snipes.
If I was what? Say it again. What'd you say?
But here's the wild part. Nino Brown wasn't just a character pulled out of thin air. His persona was inspired by a real-life figure, one of Detroit's most notorious criminals, the Chambers Brothers.
A lot of people reference me as the guy that inspired the movie New Jack City. And you know, a lot of people's jokingly call me Nino Brown. And
these guys, who were the true masterminds behind the scenes, made Nino look like a choir boy in comparison. In the movie, Nino Brown and his crew take over a rundown apartment complex called The Carter to run their entire drug operation. But what they didn't tell you is that this story wasn't just made up. It's based on real-life events that went down on the streets of Detroit. Picture this, a place where fear ran rampant, where the law didn't even dare to show up, and where the Chambers brothers held all the power. That's what the Broadmoor apartment complex was like. It sat right on the corner of E Grand Boulevard and Ferry State, and became the Chambers Brothers' fortress. This was their hub for all the shady dealings, and they ruled it with an iron fist, taking out anyone who dared to challenge them. The Chambers Brothers' journey didn't start in luxury, though. Born in Marianna, Arkansas, they came from humble beginnings. Their family struggled as sharecroppers, and with a family of 16 crammed into a tiny cabin, they learned early on that survival meant fighting for every scrap. But they refused to be victims. From picking pockets at their family's juke joint to hustling grown men in pool, the brothers realized that breaking the rules was sometimes the only way to get ahead. But even the toughest hustlers have their limits. When their parents split and the juke joint shut down, the brothers could have gone down the path of nowhere, but instead it became the fuel for the fire. Larry, Wiley Lee, BJ, and Otis, the four brothers who would become infamous, rose from the ashes of their family's downfall and built a criminal empire that became legendary. Larry, the oldest and fiercest of them all, led the charge. His fearlessness and drive made him the natural leader, while Wiley Lee, BJ, and Otis had his back, each contributing their own unique skills to the hustle. Together, they became untouchable.
Among the most remarkable examples is the notorious Chambers Brothers gang of Detroit. Billy Joe, 26, Otis, 20, Willie, 34, and the ringleader, Larry, 38.
But as time passed, things started to change. Larry got locked up a few times, and after being in and out of prison, he went through a serious transformation. Behind bars, he traded in his old habits for a devotion to health and spirituality. It was at this point that Billy Joe, or BJ, stepped up to take over the reins. With the help of a family friend, BJ and his brothers soon established themselves as major players in the crack trade. Their empire spread quickly, built on a foundation of violence and ruthlessness. But BJ wasn't just about crime for the sake of crime. He had business smarts. Using his properties, a car wash and a store, he set up shop and began pushing marijuana and crack out of both places. It didn't take long before he had a solid supply chain, getting his drugs from Big Terry Colbert, and with his close-knit crew of family members and trusted associates, BJ's empire was off to the races. As the Chambers brothers' operation grew, so did their workforce. They quickly began attracting an increasing number of young people, mostly teenagers and young adults, who saw the drug game as their ticket to wealth. These weren't just locals from Detroit. Hundreds of men and women from Mariana and the surrounding areas in the Delta region of Arkansas started migrating to the Motor City to get a piece of the action. DEA documents from that time estimate that more than 300 young people came from Arkansas alone, eager to join the Chambers brothers' expanding network.
They were recruiting gang members in their hometown, Mariana, Arkansas, luring unemployed teenagers with visions of luxury cars, furs, gold and cash. More homes, about 150 teenagers left Arkansas to work in the gang's crack houses.
The lure of quick money and power in the streets had them rushing to Detroit, where the Chambers gang was operating at full capacity. They were recruited to sell drugs, working the streets, and keeping the operation running smoothly. At its peak, the Chambers brothers' empire was massive. The government claimed that they were running 300 crack houses between 1983 and 1988. To put it into perspective, that's around $1 to $3 million a day in revenue just from the distribution of crack coke. Their lavish lifestyle, living in mansions, driving expensive cars, wearing designer clothes, was funded by their massive drug profits. The brothers didn't just keep it low-key, they flaunted their wealth at every turn, which made them even more noticeable to the authorities. Enter Patricia Middleton, who was known as Larry's den mother, a close confidant in the inner circle of the family. However, Patricia didn't stay loyal to the brothers for long. Eventually, she began feeding information to law enforcement. In exchange for a deal, she started providing insider intel that led to raids and the uncovering of evidence that would shake the foundation of the Chambers criminal empire. The real breaking point, though, came when the authorities discovered something that tied everything together: a collection of home videos. These weren't just any ordinary videos. The Chambers brothers, caught up in their lavish lifestyles, had filmed themselves enjoying the fruits of their criminal labor. With everything laid out on the table, it was only a matter of time. The Chambers brothers were soon arrested and sentenced. The government came down hard on them, charging them with a laundry list of offenses, from drug trafficking to money laundering, and ultimately, all of them faced heavy sentences. Next up is American Gangster, where Denzel Washington gave us another stellar performance.
Don't mean nothing to me. What's he gonna do, go back home? I don't give a damn what he does.
But while the movie claimed to be based on the life of Frank Lucas, the reality was a whole lot different. In fact, critics argue that the film was 99% Hollywood and 1% reality. The real Frank Lucas was a whole different animal, and his story was way darker and more complex. Frank Lucas didn't just wake up one day and decide to be a kingpin. His story started in absolute poverty. Born and raised in North Carolina, his life was tough from the jump. He never had much, but the real turning point came when he was just 6 years old. That was when he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life: a brutal act of racial violence that shaped the man he would become.
My cousin, he's 15 years old, and you know what
His 15-year-old cousin Obadiah was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan for the simple crime of allegedly looking at a white woman the wrong way. Frank watched as they gunned his cousin down in cold blood, and from that moment on, he carried a deep, burning hatred for white authority. That rage, mixed with his lack of education, since he barely went to school and never learned how to read or write, pushed him into a life of crime at an early age. At first, it was petty stuff: stealing, hustling, getting by however he could. For a short time, he even tried to go straight and found work at a pipe company. But trouble always had a way of finding Frank. While working there, he started dating the owner's daughter, which led to some serious tension. One day, things took a violent turn. Frank got into a fight with her father, lost his temper, grabbed a pipe, and knocked the man out cold. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he stole $400 from the company, set the whole place on fire, and got the hell out of North Carolina.
He struck his employer with a lead pipe, stole $400, set the establishment on fire, and fled to New York.
By 1946, Lucas had heard stories about Harlem, the legendary neighborhood in Upper Manhattan known for its thriving black culture, music, and, of course, crime. It was a place where a man could make something of himself, for better or worse. So Lucas packed up and headed straight for New York City. As soon as he arrived in Harlem, Lucas hit the ground running. He conned drunks in pool halls, robbed bars, and pulled off jewelry heists. He was just another hustler, trying to stay ahead of the game. But everything changed when he met a man who would alter the course of his life forever. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't just any gangster. He was Harlem's crime boss, a man who had earned his power by being both ruthless and respected. Like Lucas, Bumpy had fled the South to escape racial violence, and he had built a powerful empire working closely with the Italian mob. His nickname came from a bump on the back of his head, but there was nothing funny about him. He was as feared as he was admired. For years, Lucas stuck close to Bumpy, watching, learning, and absorbing everything he could about how to run an empire. Bumpy was deep in the H game, controlling the flow of drugs in Harlem under the watchful eye of the New York Mafia. But in 1952, everything changed when Bumpy was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. That left a power vacuum, and Lucas saw his chance.
I worked with Bumpy for them many years, 13 years, 9 months, and 8 days. And every dime I made, I credit him for it. I credit him for it. I worked from all that.
By the time Bumpy passed away, Lucas had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to work for anyone. Instead of taking orders, he was going to take over. But he wasn't just thinking about Harlem. He had his sights set on something bigger. See, Lucas had always believed that Southeast Asia was the best place to get H, and he wasn't about to let middlemen take a cut of his profits. So he took a huge risk. He flew to Bangkok, Thailand, right into the heart of the Golden Triangle, one of the biggest H-producing regions in the world. It was in Bangkok that Lucas walked into Jack's American Star Bar, a popular hangout for off-duty African-American soldiers. That's where he met U.S. Army Sergeant Leslie Ike Atkinson, a fellow North Carolina native who just so happened to be married to one of Lucas's cousins. This was the connection that changed everything. Ike, known as Hawk Sergeant Smack, had inside knowledge of how drugs could be smuggled through military channels. With his help, Lucas put together one of the boldest drug smuggling operations in history. They called it the Cadaver Connection. Here's how it worked. Lucas had a carpenter named Leon, another North Carolina connection, flown out to Bangkok. Leon was tasked with building 28 exact replicas of U.S. military coffins, but these weren't just any coffins. Each one had a hidden compartment capable of holding 6 to 8 kilos of H. The plan was to stuff them with H and smuggle the drugs into the United States, hidden among the bodies of dead American soldiers returning from Vietnam. According to Frank Lucas, they were careful to pack the H tightly, making sure it wouldn't shift during transport. They even chose the coffins of heavier soldiers to avoid raising suspicion about the extra weight. If Lucas's numbers were true, each kilo of H cleared him at least $300,000, which meant over $2 million per coffin. But here's where things get murky. Ike Atkinson later denied the coffin story, claiming it was just a lie he told Lucas as a ruse. Instead, he said they hollowed out teak furniture to hide the H. A biographer of Lucas later suggested that while the coffin story was exaggerated, there was credible evidence that it happened at least once. Regardless of how the drugs got into the US, one thing was certain: the H was flowing into Harlem like never before. Lucas claimed that in total, he imported more than $50 million worth of H and was making over $1 million a day. Investigators later said those numbers were wildly inflated, but one fact remained. Frank Lucas was running one of the biggest H empires in America. Unlike most high-end drug smugglers who preferred to stay in the shadows, Lucas was hands-on. He personally walked onto 116th Street and sold his own product. He was extremely careful about who he trusted, only allowing close friends and family from North Carolina to work for him. These men, known as his country boys, were in charge of distributing his H, which was famously branded as Blue Magic. The thing about Blue Magic was that it wasn't just another H brand. It was pure, uncut, and 98% straight from Thailand. That quality control made it the hottest drug in Harlem. And Lucas was making more money than he knew what to do with. Frank Lucas always said that the night he messed up was when he showed up to a Muhammad Ali fight wearing a $100,000 chinchilla coat with a matching hat. The moment he walked into Madison Square Garden, heads turned. He had better seats than some of the biggest celebrities. Sitting closer to the ring than Diana Ross and Frank Sinatra, Lucas had officially arrived. But the problem was, when you move too flashy, you attract too much attention. A photographer from Ebony magazine snapped a picture of Lucas in that luxurious fur coat, and just like that, his face was in one of the most popular black publications in the country. It wasn't just the streets watching anymore. The Feds saw it too. Years later, Lucas would admit, "I left that fight a marked man." And he was right. Up until that point, Lucas had corrupt NYPD officers in his pocket, keeping him ahead of the game. But there was one cop he couldn't buy, a relentless investigator named Richie Roberts. While most officers were taking bribes, Roberts was different. He was clean, and even worse for Lucas, he was obsessed with taking him down. By January 1975, Roberts finally had enough on Lucas to move in for the K. That month, federal agents raided Lucas's mansion in Teaneck, New Jersey. They didn't find any H, but they did seize over $500,000 in cash. Lucas, however, claimed the feds actually took $11 million, but only reported a fraction of it, pocketing the rest. Lucas was hit with serious drug charges in both state and federal courts. The end result was a 70-year prison sentence. The reign of Superfly was officially over. Or so it seemed. Frank Lucas had one last move left to play. In a shocking twist, he decided to cooperate with the feds. The same man who once ran Harlem's biggest H empire turned informant, helping take down over 100 drug dealers, corrupt cops, and even members of the mafia. His cooperation got him a major sentence reduction. Instead of 70 years, he only served about 15 years before being released into the Witness Protection Program. Next up is Paid in Full, a film about gangsters in New York City, featuring a character inspired by the real-life drug kingpin Alpo Martinez.
You ain't call me on that shit, B.
Alpo rose to infamy as a major drug dealer in Harlem during the 1980s and 1990s, building a reputation for his bold moves and ruthless ambition. Alpo Martinez grew up in a Puerto Rican household fluent in both English and Spanish. That ability to move between cultures would later give him an advantage in the drug trade. As a kid, Alpo was full of energy, always charming, always talking, always figuring out a way to hustle. He had this natural gift for making people like him, which would later help him rise in the streets. Every summer, he would leave Harlem and stay with a white family through the Fresh Air Fund program, a nonprofit that sent city kids to the suburbs for a break from urban life. For a little while, he got a taste of something different, a world without drugs, without crime. But every time summer ended and he came back to Harlem, reality hit. By the late 1970s, Harlem was changing fast. The streets were filling up with drug dealers, flashy cars, and fast money. Young Alpo wanted in. He started by robbing drug dealers, snatching cash and jewelry off the people making money. But that wasn't enough. He didn't just want to take money, he wanted to make it. By 1983, Alpo was running the streets, attracting attention from both police and rival dealers. He had a hunger for money and was willing to do whatever it took to get it.
Alpo liked good things, nice things, but wow, get a motorcycle, buy a brand new bike where the crowd is at, do wheelies, crash it, and the next day go buy another motorcycle.
That year, he caught his first serious charge, but it didn't slow him down. In 1985, while serving a 1-year prison sentence for a weapons charge, Alpo met someone who would change his life, Rich Porter. When he got out, he was determined to find a real drug connection, someone who could put him on the map. That's when he met AZ Faison, a respected Harlem drug dealer who was making serious money. At first, Arizona wasn't sure about Alpo. He didn't trust him, but Rich Porter vouched for him, and that was enough. Alpo quickly proved himself. AZ started using Alpo as an enforcer, sending him to handle problems, intimidate rivals, and take care of business. And Alpo loved it. When stick-up kids started robbing AZ's spots, Alpo was the one who handled them. When AZ moved his operation to 135th Street, he offered Alpo a new territory on 145th Street. Alpo took it without hesitation. By the mid-1980s, Alpo had leveled up. He was out of prison, fully in the game, and making insane amounts of money. He and his crew were pulling in $40,000 to $50,000 a week each, but it wasn't just about the cash. It was about the status. Alpo loved the limelight. He wasn't like other drug dealers who tried to stay low-key. He wanted people to see him, to know his name. He became known for his flashy style, fast cars, and wild behavior. He would ride dirt bikes through the city, sometimes kicking police cars just to start high-speed chases. He and his crew would take trips to Myrtle Beach, bringing their bikes and showing off. But that love for attention would eventually become his biggest weakness as time went on.
Alpo Martinez was an individual that just loved the limelight, and that was what caused a lot of issues.
Things between Alpo Martinez and Rich Porter took a turn for the worse. Their relationship, once built on trust and money, started to crack under the weight of greed and paranoia. Eventually, things got so bad that Alpo allegedly had Rich offed. After Porter's death, Alpo knew Harlem was getting too hot, so he made his way down to Washington, D.C., where he took his drug empire to the next level. But it wasn't just business. Alpo brought the same ruthless energy with him. He had no problem eliminating anyone who got in his way, whether it was rivals, former allies, or people he simply felt couldn't be trusted. His name was attached to so many bodies that law enforcement had been watching him for a while, quietly building a case against him. They knew he was a key player in the drug game, but they needed solid proof to take him down. Exactly how many people Alpo had offed, that's something we may never truly know. But one thing was certain. His luck was running out. On November 7th, 1991, the same day Magic Johnson shocked the world by announcing his HIV diagnosis, Alpo's world came crashing down. The FBI finally caught up with him in Southeast Washington, bringing an end to a year-long manhunt for one of the most infamous drug lords in America. Faced with the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars, Alpo cooperated with the feds. He started naming names, giving up people who once stood by his side. His decision to snitch turned many of his old friends and associates into prisoners, and in exchange for his testimony, his sentence was cut down to 35 years. After serving his time, he was released in 2015 and placed in the Witness Protection Program. But even a new identity couldn't save him. On October 31st, 2021, Alpo Martinez was shot and offed while sitting in his Ram truck on Frederick Douglass Boulevard in Harlem.